7 years ago, Vincent Moretti left her in a hospital bed 3 weeks after she gave birth to their daughter, with nothing but a note and an empty bank account. Today, he just checked into her hotel. He doesn't know it yet. His mother is already snapping her fingers at the woman standing quietly in the lobby. The woman who owns every inch of this building, every thread of linen in every suite, every name on every payroll. Charlotte Hayes hasn't said a word. She doesn't need to. The moment is already in motion. Like and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Charlotte Hayes turned 41, she did not celebrate. She woke at 5 the way she always did. Not from an alarm, but from habit worn so deep into the muscle it had become biology. The penthouse suite on the 14th floor of the Meridian Grand's Chicago flagship was hers by deed and by the kind of exhaustion that precedes every real thing a person ever builds. The room was quiet. The city beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass was the color of cold iron, the lake flat and colorless under a November sky that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to do. She stood at the window in bare feet on cool marble and held a cup of coffee in both hands and let herself have 30 seconds. That was the deal she'd made with herself years ago. 30 seconds every morning. Not for gratitude, not for reflection. Just 30 seconds where she was allowed to feel the weight of what her life actually was. All of it, the good and the ugly together, before she put it away and went back to work. She counted them out. The city shifted, barely. A delivery truck rolled down Michigan Avenue 7 stories below. A pigeon landed on the edge of the glass and looked at her sideways and flew off. 30 seconds. Then she put the cup down and went to get dressed. Charlotte had not always been the kind of woman who moved through rooms the way she moved now, with the particular economy of someone who had stopped apologizing for taking up space. That version of her had taken years to build, and the construction had not been clean. It had been mortared with things she didn't talk about in interviews. The night shifts at the Ellison Arms Hotel in Columbus, Ohio, scrubbing bathroom tiles on her knees while her infant daughter slept in a portable crib she'd wedged behind the supply cart because the overnight sitter had called in sick and she hadn't had anywhere else to take the baby. The second job at the airport Hilton she'd worked on weekends, pushing carts through jet-lagged corridors at 2 a.m. and training herself not to look at her own reflection in the polished elevator doors because she couldn't afford what she saw there. She didn't talk about those years because she'd noticed that people heard that kind of story and felt inspired in the wrong way. They took it as evidence that suffering was noble, that poverty was a crucible worth enduring, that the hardship was somehow necessary. Charlotte didn't believe that. The hardship had just been hardship. It hadn't made her better. It had just failed to kill her. What had made her was stubbornness and a cold-eyed willingness to learn things she had no business knowing. She'd started with one property, a failing 40-room motor lodge outside Cincinnati that she'd leveraged into existence using a second mortgage on a house she didn't technically own yet, a small business loan from a community bank whose loan officer had looked at her business plan for 11 minutes without blinking, and the kind of negotiating that happens when you have nothing left to lose and you know it, and the other person doesn't. She'd sanded the floors herself. She'd retiled the bathrooms herself. She'd designed the logo herself, badly at first, better after 3 months of watching tutorial videos at midnight on a cracked laptop while her daughter, Ellie, slept in the next room with one arm thrown over a stuffed rabbit that had long since lost both its button eyes. From that one property, slowly, the way real things grow, not fast and viral, but root deep and stubborn, she had built what was now the Hayes Collection. 12 hotels across 7 states, 3 flagships in Chicago, New York, and Charleston, over 4,000 employees, an occupancy rate that her competitors studied in quarterly reviews and could not replicate because the thing that drove it wasn't decor or amenity or brand identity. It was the way every single person who worked in a Hayes Collection property had been trained to treat every single guest, not with deference, not with servility, but with the particular warmth of someone who genuinely understood that the guest was tired and far from home and deserved to feel that somebody had thought about their comfort before they arrived. Charlotte had written that training protocol herself. She knew where it had come from. By the time she stepped off the elevator into the Meridian Grand's lobby at 6:47 in the morning, she was already on her second call of the day. The Chicago property manager, Derek Paulson, fell into step beside her with a tablet and a look on his face that meant something had required a judgment call overnight, and he was already apologizing in advance. Two things, he said. The kitchen fire suppression on the secondary line triggered a false positive around 2 a.m. Building management handled it, no actual event, but we had to temporarily reroute breakfast service to the terrace room. And the second thing, Derek hesitated. One beat too long. Charlotte pulled the phone from her ear and looked at him. We have a group check-in arriving today, he said. Originally listed as a corporate booking under Meridian Holdings LLC. 7 rooms, including the presidential suite. I looked into it this morning because the spend profile didn't match the company name. He offered her the tablet. The booking was made by someone named Connie Marchetti. I ran the principals. Meridian Holdings is a shell. The actual party is... Charlotte looked at the screen. She stood very still. The lobby moved around her the way lobbies always did in the morning. The soft percussion of luggage wheels, the low hum of the espresso machine behind the bar, 2 early rising guests in business clothes walking toward the revolving doors with their heads down in their phones. A normal morning. A Tuesday in November. Everything ordinary. She handed the tablet back to Derek. Expand the holding around the presidential suite, she said. Move whoever's in 1208 and 1210 to comparable rooms on the 11th floor. Comp their difference, no explanation needed. Ms. Hayes, also, make sure housekeeping has completed the full suite turn on 14. I want fresh towels, not same-day replenishment. Full turn. Do you want me to... No. She started walking again. I'll handle it myself. Derek was smart enough not to ask anything else. She walked to her office behind the concierge station. A small, deliberately understated room she'd designed to look less like a CEO's suite and more like a well-organized manager's workspace, because she had learned early that the best way to understand what was happening in a property was to be somewhere in it that didn't signal authority. She closed the door and sat down behind the desk and looked at the name on Derek's tablet, which she'd memorized in the 2 seconds she'd held it. Vincent Moretti. She said nothing. She was alone, so there was nobody to say anything to. She sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk, both palms down on the cool surface, and she breathed. Not dramatically, not the way it happened in movies when the camera pushes in and the music swells, just a woman at a desk, breathing, because that's what the body requires. Vincent Moretti. She hadn't seen him in 7 years. She'd heard about him, the way you hear about weather systems moving across a continent. Not directly, not personally, but in the ambient way that someone at that level of notoriety tends to accumulate into the news cycle, into the kind of profile pieces that ran in national magazines under headlines like "The New Face of Organized Crime" and "The Quiet Empire." He had inherited the Moretti Syndicate from his father at 32, 3 months before he'd left Charlotte in a hospital in Columbus with a newborn in her arms, and a handwritten note on the pillow of the room he hadn't slept in that said simply, "I'm sorry. This isn't what my life is." She had kept the note for 2 years. Then she'd burned it. Not in any ceremonial way. She'd just held it over a kitchen sink with a lighter and watched it go. She knew what his life was now. She had made it her business to know, because knowing was armor, and Charlotte Hayes had never been careless about her own protection. Vincent Moretti, at 39, was the head of one of the most feared criminal organizations on the East Coast. He ran it from a compound outside Newark through a network of legitimate businesses, construction, waste management, a small chain of auto dealerships, that served as the public face of operations Charlotte had never looked too directly at because there was no benefit in that direction. He had married, 18 months after leaving her, a woman named Gianna Russo, the daughter of a Boston syndicate family. The marriage was tactical, by every account, and had produced no children. He had a mother, Connie Moretti, now Connie Marchetti, after a brief second marriage, who had made Charlotte's 2 years with Vincent a specific and dedicated kind of misery, who had called Charlotte the maid in Italian at family dinners until Charlotte had learned enough Italian to understand what was being said, at which point the comments had simply moved to English. And now, all of them, apparently, were arriving at the Meridian Grand at 11 o'clock this morning for a family stay that someone had tried to disguise behind a shell company, possibly because Vincent Moretti's name on a luxury hotel reservation tended to attract a certain type of federal attention. Charlotte sat for 1 more minute. Then she straightened her jacket, checked her hair in the dark reflection of her dormant computer monitor, and went back to work. She did not call her lawyer. She did not call her assistant. She did not ask Derek to handle the situation or consult with her board or reach out to the publicist she kept on a quiet retainer for the moments when the Hayes collection intersected with things that required a certain kind of narrative management. She went and stood at the far end of the lobby near the floral installation she'd commissioned from a Chicago artist, 12 feet of white and burnished gold blooms that served no purpose except to make people feel, the moment they walked through the door, that they had arrived somewhere that expected their arrival. And she waited. They came in at 11:43, which was later than the booking confirmed, which she suspected was intentional. People with that kind of money often arrived late as a statement of position, as a way of saying that the world's schedule bent to theirs and not the reverse. The revolving door pushed through 5 of them. Connie Marchetti, came first, the way she always had, preceding any room like a weather front. She was 71 now, and age had not softened her the way it softened some people. It had concentrated her. She wore a fur-collared coat and had her silver hair set in the same architectural style she'd maintained as long as Charlotte could remember. And she moved through the lobby with her chin slightly elevated, the expression of a woman conducting an inspection. Behind her came 2 younger relatives, cousins, Charlotte guessed, from the Marchetti side, a man and a woman in their early 30s who wore expensive clothes with the slightly stiff quality of people who had acquired money recently and were still adjusting to its weight. Then Gianna Moretti, Vincent's wife. Charlotte had seen photographs. The photographs had not been inaccurate. Gianna was tall, dark-haired, constructed with the kind of careful maintenance that required both money and dedication, and she moved with the practiced confidence of a woman who had been beautiful long enough to use it as information rather than ornament. She wore sunglasses inside, which said something, though Charlotte wasn't sure what yet. And then Vincent. She'd been prepared for the visual. She'd told herself she was prepared. She was not entirely prepared. He was larger than she remembered. Not taller, but more settled into his size, the way men sometimes get in their late 30s when the restlessness that had defined them in youth finally finds somewhere to land. He was wearing a charcoal overcoat and no tie, his dark hair shorter than it had been, the angles of his face sharper. He moved with the absolute unhurried authority of a man who had never, in his adult life, been required to rush. He did not see her. He was on his phone, 2 steps behind Gianna, his attention divided between the call and some internal calculation she couldn't read from across the lobby. He swept the room with the automatic assessment that people in his position develop, a single pass that cataloged exits and positions and threats, and his eyes crossed the space where Charlotte was standing and moved on without stopping. 7 years. She was wearing a tailored burgundy blazer over a white silk shirt, heels that put her at 5'9", her dark hair pulled back in the structured way she'd learned from watching women in the boardrooms where she'd first had to earn the right to be taken seriously. She looked, she knew, nothing like the woman he'd left. He hadn't recognized her. She let herself register that and what it felt like, and then she put it away. Connie had already reached the front desk. Charlotte watched from her position near the flowers as Derek handled the check-in with the smooth efficiency she'd trained him toward, producing keycards and itineraries and the kind of attentive professionalism that was the Hayes collection's signature. Connie accepted this with the tolerance of someone accustomed to good service without particularly noticing it, and then Connie turned around, scanning the lobby, and her eyes landed on Charlotte, on a woman standing alone near the flowers in a blazer, unoccupied, not visibly engaged in any transaction. And Charlotte watched. She had known it was coming, had positioned herself exactly where it would, as Connie Moretti's expression shifted into the register of a woman who has identified a piece of furniture that is in a slightly wrong place. "You," Connie said, crossing the lobby with the particular entitlement of a woman who had spent her entire life calling people you. "Those bags need to go to the presidential suite, the ones by the door." She gestured without looking, the gesture of someone indicating an object rather than addressing a person. "And be careful with the brown case. It's leather." Charlotte did not move. She stood with her hands loose at her sides and looked at Connie Moretti with an expression she had spent considerable time cultivating over the course of her professional life. Not cold, not hostile, just entirely, unmovably calm. The expression of a woman who had heard far worse than this and had long since stopped requiring the source to know any better. "Ma'am," she said. Her voice was level. No edge, no performance. "There are porters near the entrance who'll be happy to assist you. Any member of the front desk staff can direct them." Connie's chin came up a fraction. "I'm telling you to do it." "I understand," Charlotte said. "I'm not able to help you with that." Connie's eyes narrowed. It was the eyes, Charlotte remembered. She had always used the eyes as the primary instrument of her disapproval, the way some people used volume or temperature. "Excuse me?" "The porters are near the entrance," Charlotte said again. Same tone, same steadiness. "They'll get everything up to the suite." Connie stared at her for a moment with the particular bafflement of someone encountering a rule of physics that doesn't match their understanding of the universe. Then she turned and said something sharp to the cousin behind her, who went to find a porter, and Connie went back to directing the check-in as though the interruption hadn't happened. Charlotte remained where she was. Vincent was still on his phone. He had not witnessed the exchange. Or if he hadn't connected the woman his mother had attempted to conscript as a bellhop with anyone whose non-compliance required his attention. She watched him cross the lobby and step into the elevator, still on the call, without once looking back. The doors closed. Charlotte let out a breath through her nose, slow, deliberate, no visible drama. Then she walked back to her office and sat down and stared at the wall for 11 minutes, which was more time than she had given herself to feel anything about Vincent Moretti in a very long while. There was a framed photograph on her desk. She kept it turned at an angle that made it visible from her chair, but not from the door. So visitors didn't see it before she'd decided whether she wanted to explain it. It showed a girl of about 6, gap-toothed and laughing at something outside the frame, caught mid-motion in the act of running, one sneaker lifted completely off the ground. Ellie. Eleanor Ann Hayes, age 6 in the photograph, now 7 and 3 months and currently in 2nd grade at a school in Lincoln Park, where Charlotte had enrolled her 9 months ago when she'd finally felt stable enough, financially and otherwise, to stop moving them every time the business needed her in a different city. Ellie knew her father's name. Charlotte had told her the truth in the careful, age-adjusted way that child psychologists advised. Not a story designed to make the girl angry, not a story designed to protect the absent man, just the plain facts arranged into something a 7-year-old could hold without it breaking her. Daddy is a person who made a choice. Sometimes people make choices, and then they have to live inside of them. You were not the reason. You were never the reason. Ellie had accepted this with the pragmatism that Charlotte both admired and found quietly heartbreaking in her daughter. The self-possession of a child who had learned young that some questions didn't have better answers, and that asking them again wouldn't change that. She thought about Ellie now, sitting somewhere on the 12th floor above her in a hotel that Charlotte owned, in a suite she'd moved her into quietly the previous evening after Derek had flagged the booking. She'd told Ellie they were having a special sleepover at Mama's work hotel. Ellie had thought this was excellent news and had requested extra pillows. Charlotte pushed back from the desk. Whatever happened over the next 24 to 48 hours, and she had a clear enough view of the shape of it to know that something was going to happen, because fate had never once offered her a clean exit from anything. She was going to handle it on her terms. On the ground she had built. In the building that had her name in the incorporation papers and her blood in the margins. She spent the rest of the afternoon working. She took 3 calls with the development team about the Charleston expansion, reviewed 2 employment contracts her HR director had flagged, approved a menu change for the spring season in the hotel restaurant, and walked 2 full floors of the property with Derek doing the kind of operations review she conducted every time she was in-house. Checking temperatures, checking linens, checking whether the staff were moving with energy or fatigue, asking questions of the room attendants and kitchen runners, the way she'd learned to ask them back when she was one of them. She ate dinner alone in her office at 7. She did not go up to the presidential suite level. She did not send anyone to observe or report. She simply went about the business of running her hotel. At 9:47, her phone buzzed with a message from Derek. FYI, guest in 1401 called down requesting private dining setup in suite. Ordered enough for 6. Looks like a family dinner situation. No issues. Charlotte read the message and set the phone face down on the desk. The presidential suite was the 14th floor's only room. She had designed it herself 3 years ago, when the Meridian Grand had undergone its last renovation. High ceilings, a full dining room, a library alcove with first editions she'd curated personally, a master bedroom with views of the lake that she had stood in front of more times than she could count. She'd never imagined having a reason to regret any of it. She got up and stood by her office window, looking out at the city. The lake was invisible from here. Her office was interior-facing, but she knew it was out there, enormous and cold and indifferent the way she'd always found the lake to be, which was something she'd come to appreciate about it. Tomorrow morning. She already knew what was going to happen tomorrow morning, the same way she'd always known what was going to happen next in her own story, not because the future was predetermined, but because she had studied the people involved with enough attention to know exactly how they would behave when they encountered a boundary they hadn't expected. Connie Moretti was going to discover that the Hayes Collection's VIP amenity program, the private access to the spa, the in-suite champagne service, the reserved dining tables, the car service to O'Hare, was a tiered benefit that required registration and verification through the member program, and that the Meridian Holdings LLC booking had been made at the standard rate without any membership affiliation. Connie was going to ask why, and the answer was going to be that there was no reason. Standard booking, standard service. Everything they were entitled to, nothing more. And then Connie was going to demand to speak with management. Charlotte finished her coffee. She went to the window one more time and looked at the night version of Chicago, all that cold light against the dark, and let herself feel, just for 30 seconds, the way she always allowed herself, the full specific weight of what tomorrow was going to require. She was going to walk into that lobby, and she was going to stand in front of the man who had left her, and in front of the woman who had looked at her across 30 family dinners and called her nothing, and she was going to be exactly what she was. The owner. Not the housekeeper, not the maid, not the woman who got left, not the cautionary tale or the comeback story, or any of the other shapes that other people had tried to force her life into. Just the owner. She set the coffee cup down with a sound like a period at the end of a long sentence. Then she went upstairs, checked in on Ellie, deeply asleep, surrounded by the extra pillows, the stuffed rabbit now with one remaining button eye somehow still faithfully present at her side, and went to bed. In the presidential suite above her, the lights were still on at midnight. She could see the soft glow of them from the service corridor she walked through on her way back from the linen closet where she'd gone to straighten one shelf that didn't need straightening, for the same reason she'd always gone back to straighten things in the middle of the night. Because when she was moving, she didn't feel afraid. She stood in the corridor for a moment and looked up at the ceiling, knowing what was above it, and then she walked back to her room and lay down in the dark and waited for morning. The call came at 8:14. Derek's voice on the intercom. "Ms. Hayes, the Moretti party is at the spa reception requesting access. It's..." A pause. "It's becoming a situation." Charlotte was already dressed. She had been dressed since 6. "I'll be right there," she said. She checked herself in the mirror by the door. Burgundy had been yesterday's statement, understated and quiet, appropriate for a woman choosing not to be seen yet. Today she was wearing the charcoal Armani suit she reserved for days when she needed the room to understand immediately who it was dealing with. Clean lines, no jewelry except the single watch that had been the first expensive thing she'd ever bought herself, 8 years ago. With the first real profit, the Cincinnati property had turned. She rode the elevator down to the spa level. She could hear Connie Moretti's voice from the hallway. Charlotte did not speed up. She did not slow down. She walked at her normal pace, which was not a slow pace, through the glass doors and into the spa reception area, and she took in the scene in a single look. Connie at the desk, 2 cousins behind her, a visibly uncomfortable spa attendant, and Pam standing at the far edge of the room, arms crossed, clearly having been summoned from somewhere else. Vincent. He turned when the door opened, and this time he looked directly at her, and she watched his face, watched it with a precision she had not allowed herself the day before because she hadn't been ready, as it went through the sequence she'd expected. Recognition beginning at the jawline and moving upward, the slight adjustment in posture, the very brief stillness that preceded a recalibration of an entire operating understanding of the world. His mouth opened slightly, closed. Charlotte did not give him a moment to find language. She looked past him, to Connie, with the same expression she'd worn yesterday. Not hostile, not triumphant, not anything he could name or hold on to. And she said, clearly, in the voice she used for rooms that needed to understand something once. "Good morning. I'm Charlotte Hayes. I own this property." The silence that followed was the best 30 seconds she'd had in 7 years. But it was Connie who spoke first, and what she said sent a ripple through the room that Charlotte had not, despite everything she'd prepared for, entirely anticipated, because Connie Moretti, to her credit, had never in her life been a woman who backed down easily. And what Connie said was not an apology, and it was not surprise, and it was not the appropriate shame of a woman who has just realized what she's done. What Connie said was, "Well, isn't that convenient?" And Charlotte understood, in that moment, that this was going to be more complicated than she'd planned. The word convenient hung in the air of the spa reception like smoke from something that had been burning for a long time before anyone noticed. Charlotte did not react, not visibly. She let the word sit there for a full 3 seconds, long enough for everyone in the room to hear it twice, the second time more clearly than the first. And then she turned her attention to the spa attendant, a young woman named Rosa, whose name tag Charlotte knew because she had personally reviewed every hire on this floor. "Rosa," she said, "would you give us a few minutes?" Rosa looked grateful enough to cry. She disappeared through the back corridor with the speed of someone who had correctly identified the temperature of a room. Charlotte turned back. Connie Moretti stood at the reception desk with one hand resting on the marble surface as though she owned it, her fur-collared coat still on, her silver hair immaculate, her expression carrying the particular satisfaction of a woman who believes she has just scored a point. The two cousins, Charlotte had since learned from Derek that they were Marco and Sarah Marchetti, Connie's stepchildren from the second marriage, stood slightly behind her in the specific posture of people who have attended enough of Connie's confrontations to know that their role is to form a backdrop, not a chorus. Gianna Moretti was not present. Charlotte noted this, filed it, and Vincent. Vincent had not moved from the far wall since Charlotte had walked in. He stood with his arms still crossed, his weight back, his face doing the thing it had always done when he was processing something he hadn't planned for, a kind of deliberate stillness that used to read to Charlotte as composure, but that she understood now, with 7 years of distance and the cleaner eyesight that distance produced, as control. Not calm. Control. The effort of a man holding himself at a precise temperature. He was watching her the way she'd expected him to watch her, taking inventory, looking for the seams in what he was seeing, the places where the woman in front of him aligned or failed to align with the woman he'd last seen in a hospital bed in Columbus, 31 years old, with an infant in her arms and nothing in her face but the particular blankness of someone who has just understood that they have been abandoned. She didn't let him find the seams. There weren't any. She had spent years making sure of that. "Miss Moretti," Charlotte said, addressing Connie directly. Still the same level voice, still nothing in it that could be called anger, because anger would have given Connie something to grab onto. "I want to make sure our guests have everything they're entitled to. Can you tell me what the issue was this morning?" Connie's chin lifted. "The issue is that your staff turned us away from the spa. Were you told why?" "Something about a membership, a program." Connie dismissed this with a slight movement of her free hand. "Nonsense. We're in the presidential suite." "You are," Charlotte said. "The presidential suite is our finest room, and I hope you found it comfortable." She let that sit for exactly 1 beat. The VIP amenity program, which includes private spa access, reserved dining, and the car service, is a separate membership tier. It's not included in the room rate. It requires advance enrollment. Then enroll us. The enrollment process takes 48 hours for verification. Then make an exception. I'm afraid that's not something we do. The room shifted, not loudly, but with the distinct pressure change of something tightening. Connie's expression moved through several things quickly. Disbelief, then the rapid recalculation of a woman accustomed to obstacles dissolving when she pushed against them. "You're the owner," she said. "You can do whatever you choose." "Yes," Charlotte said, "and I choose to apply the same standard to every guest." It was the cleanest thing she'd said in the whole exchange, and it landed the way she'd intended. Not as a cut, but as a wall. Smooth, solid, no handholds. Connie stared at her. And then Connie said, in a lower register, the tone she'd used at family dinners in Newark when she wanted to indicate that the conversation had moved from social to serious. "I think perhaps we should speak privately." I'm available to meet with any guest, Charlotte said, though I'll tell you now that the answer will be the same. That, Connie said, is not what I want to speak about. The first clean silence. Charlotte held it for a moment. Then she said, My office is through the lobby. I can have coffee brought in. She walked out without waiting to see who followed. Two of them followed. She heard the footsteps on the marble behind her. 2 sets, not the shuffle of 4. When she turned at the corridor junction, it was Connie and Vincent. The cousins had been left at the spa, which told Charlotte that Connie had decided this conversation required fewer witnesses, which told Charlotte that Connie knew exactly what she was doing. Good. Charlotte led them through the lobby. Morning traffic now, guests at the coffee bar, the concierge handling 2 separate inquiries, everything running the way it always ran, and into her office. She closed the door. She did not sit. She stood behind the desk, which was not a dominance choice but a practical one. She'd learned years ago that sitting in negotiations put your eye level below the standing oppositions, and she was not interested in that geometry today. Connie sat without being invited. Vincent did not sit. He stood near the door with his coat still on and his eyes moving around the room in that automatic cataloging way, and when they landed on the photograph on the desk, Ellie at 6, mid-run, gap-toothed and brilliant, they stopped. Charlotte watched him see it. She watched the recognition move across his face before he'd had time to prepare for it, because some things come in faster than control can manage, and the face of his daughter was apparently one of them. His jaw shifted. Something moved in his throat, and then he looked up and found Charlotte already looking at him, and the eye contact between them after 7 years was not comfortable for either of them. But Charlotte had prepared for it, and Vincent had not. She gave him nothing. "We know who you are," Connie said. "I know you do," Charlotte said. "You planned this." "I run a hotel," Charlotte said. "Guests make reservations. I didn't make yours." "You could have refused it." "I could have," Charlotte agreed. "That would have been petty." Connie's expression tightened at the word. "What you're doing now is petty. What I'm doing now is running my business by the same rules I apply to everyone." Charlotte kept her voice at the same temperature it had been since this morning. "If you feel differently, you're welcome to check out, and I'll refund the unused nights. I'll have Derek arrange alternative accommodations." "We're not leaving," Connie said. "Then you'll have what the booking provides." "This is about him." Connie nodded toward Vincent, whose expression had not changed, but whose hands had slightly. The fingers of one hand pressing against the inside of his other wrist, a tell Charlotte remembered from 15 years ago when he was holding something down. "This is personal." "Mama," Vincent said. His voice was quiet. It had always been quiet. She'd forgotten that, or pretended to. "It's not personal," Charlotte said. "You made a hotel reservation. I'm a hotel." Charlotte, her name in his mouth, after 7 years. She felt it land somewhere in the vicinity of her sternum, and she breathed through it the same way she breathed through everything, in through the nose, steady, giving nothing away. "Mr. Moretti," she said. He stopped. She watched him absorb the distance of it, the title, the last name, the 3-foot expanse of desk that she was very deliberately maintaining between them. "Charlotte," he said again, softer, like he was testing the word to see if it still worked. "We don't have a personal conversation available to us," she said. "We have a business one. If there's something else you'd like to discuss, that's a conversation for a different time and a different location. You can't just—" "Vincent," her turn to say his name, and she made sure it came out the way she'd practiced saying it alone in the months after he'd left, when she'd trained herself not to let it do anything to her vocal cords. Flat, informational, a word that pointed at a person without carrying any cargo. "I can do exactly this. This is my building. These are my terms. You're welcome to stay or welcome to go, and either way I run the same hotel tomorrow morning." Connie made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "I want to see her," Vincent said. The room went very still. Charlotte held him in her gaze for a long moment, long enough that the silence had a shape. Then she said, "That's not happening today. I have a right." "You have a biological connection," Charlotte said. "Rights are a different thing. Rights require presence. Rights require showing up." She stopped herself. Not because she'd lost control of the tone, but because she'd promised herself she wasn't going to do this here. Not in her office with Connie Moretti sitting 3 feet away cataloging everything for later use. Today is not the day for that conversation, and this is not the place. Vincent's jaw was tight. When then? I'll let you know. That is what I have for you right now. She looked at Connie. Is there anything else about the booking? Connie was watching the exchange with the expression of a chess player observing a board she thought she understood and has just realized she doesn't. There was something new in it. Not respect exactly, but its immediate precursor. The moment before a person who has never taken you seriously begins to consider that they might need to. You've done well for yourself, Connie said finally. The tone was unreadable. Not a compliment, not a concession, something in between that Connie could walk back in any direction she chose. Yes, Charlotte said, I have. And you want us to understand that. I don't need you to understand anything, Charlotte said. I need you to follow the same policies as everyone else in this building. She opened the door. The meeting was over. Vincent didn't move for a moment. He stood just inside the doorway with that stillness, looking at the photograph on her desk one more time, and Charlotte saw, against every wall she'd built against seeing it, something in his face that was not calculation and not strategy and not the performance of remorse. Something that looked like the genuine thing, plain and useless, the way grief looks when it has no place to go. She felt nothing useful in response to it. She felt something, which was the problem. The porters can assist with any luggage needs, she said. The restaurant begins service at noon. He walked out. Connie followed without another word, which was more unsettling, Charlotte reflected, than if she'd said something. Connie silent was Connie thinking, and Connie thinking was Connie planning, and that was a variable Charlotte needed to account for. She closed the office door, stood with her back against it. Her hands were completely steady. She checked because she always checked. Because the first year after Vincent had left, her hands had shaken at nothing, at grocery store receipts and car horns and the ordinary sounds of a world that was just continuing regardless. And she had spent considerable effort training them back to stillness. They were still now. She pushed off the door and went to her desk and pulled out her phone and called her lawyer. Anna, she said when the call connected, I need you on standby for the next 48 hours. What level? Not emergency, but close enough to it that I want you available. Understood. Do I need to know the situation? Charlotte thought about it. Vincent Moretti is staying in my presidential suite. A pause. Then Ana Ferreira, who had been Charlotte's attorney for 6 years and who knew all the relevant history, said simply, I'll clear my calendar. The rest of the morning passed in the specific way that difficult mornings pass when you are running an operation that requires your full attention regardless of your internal weather. One task replacing the next, the work filling in around the spaces where the other thing tried to sit. Charlotte was in the middle of a call with the Charleston general manager at 1:15 when Derek appeared in her doorway with the look on his face that had preceded every complication this week. She held up one finger. He waited. She finished the call. What? The cousins, Derek said. Marco and Sarah. They went to the restaurant for lunch, and Marco tried to comp the meal using the presidential suite account. That's not how it works. I know. The server explained that. Marco became... Derek chose his word carefully. Loud. Charlotte set her pen down. How loud? Loud enough that 3 other tables heard it. One of them, another careful pause, had a phone out. There it was. The variable she'd half expected and half hoped wouldn't arrive for at least another 12 hours. In the age of phones pointed at every room, every lobby, every restaurant where someone decided to have a public feeling, the window between an incident and its permanent public existence had collapsed to approximately 4 minutes. Where is it? She said. Trending locally, Derek said, as of about 20 minutes ago. The framing is on you, Ms. Hayes, not negatively. Someone identified the property, identified you. There's a piece running already on the Chicago social pages about the Hayes collection, and he looked at his tablet, a woman who stood her ground against the mob. He looked up. The words mob and Moretti are in the post, with your hotel's name. Charlotte said nothing for a moment. She did the calculation. The calculation took about 15 seconds. On one side, the exposure, the complication, the way this could look if the framing shifted, the federal sensitivity of anything adjacent to the Moretti name. On the other side, her hotel. her name above the door. Her 4,000 employees whose paychecks carried a dignity she had designed deliberately and whose jobs depended on a reputation she had built on the specific proposition that no amount of money or power entitled anyone to treat her property or her people as an extension of their own ego. There was no calculation, actually. "Get Marcus from communications," she said. "We're not issuing a statement yet. When we do, it will be simple. The Hayes collection applies the same standards to every guest. Full stop." "And the Moretti situation is a guest situation," Charlotte said. "Until it isn't." Derek nodded. He started to leave. Charlotte stopped him. "Where's Vincent Moretti right now?" Derek checked his tablet. "He went out around noon, black SUV. He's not back yet." "And his wife?" "Room service delivery at 11:30. She hasn't left the suite." Charlotte considered this. "Make sure housekeeping doesn't go to that floor without clearing through you first." "Understood." He left. She sat for a moment, then got up and walked to the small window that looked onto the service alley. Not a glamorous view, just the functional back of things. The loading dock and the dumpsters and the constant transit of supplies that kept a hotel alive. And she stood there the way she used to stand at the window of the Cincinnati property when she was 29 and so tired she'd forgotten what not being tired felt like. And she'd needed to look at something real and without pretension to reset herself. She was 41 years old. She had not gotten here by being reckless, and she had not gotten here by being passive. The line between those two things was where she lived, and she knew exactly where it was. Upstairs, 14 floors above her, Gianna Moretti was in a suite ordering room service and not leaving, and Charlotte thought about what that meant. You did not stay in a hotel room all morning when the city of Chicago was outside your window unless you were either sick or hiding from something, and Gianna Moretti had not looked sick at check-in. At 3:42, the thing Charlotte had been waiting for arrived in a form she hadn't predicted. It wasn't Connie, it wasn't Vincent, who had still not returned from wherever the black SUV had taken him. It was Gianna. She appeared at the entrance to Charlotte's office. The door had been open, the way Charlotte kept it open during working hours. In different clothes than check-in, hair loose now, the sunglasses gone. Without them, her eyes were dark and tired and considerably less certain than her posture suggested. And she stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame in a posture that Charlotte read immediately. Not aggression. Not Connie's kind of entrance. All pressure and preemptive occupation of space. This was a woman who had knocked and wasn't sure if she was allowed in. "Ms. Hayes," Gianna said. Charlotte studied her for a half second. "Come in." Gianna crossed the threshold and sat in the chair across from the desk, without the entitlement of the morning. She had her hands in her lap, and she looked at Charlotte with the direct, slightly exhausted look of someone who has decided to skip the preamble. "I want to tell you something," Gianna said, "that you're probably not going to believe." "Try me," Charlotte said. Gianna looked at the desk for a moment, at the photograph of Ellie, then back at Charlotte. "I didn't know you existed," she said. "Not really. I knew there'd been a woman before me. I knew there was a daughter. I didn't know—" She stopped. Restarted. "Nobody told me what he left. I found out 6 months ago. I found some papers, bank statements from an account I'd never seen, from the year he left you." Charlotte waited. "He transferred $70,000 out of that account 3 days before he gave you the note," Gianna said. "Into a separate account. I don't know where it went. I don't think it went to you." The room was very quiet. Charlotte looked at the woman across from her with the same stillness she always maintained in rooms where things were breaking, and she felt, beneath the stillness, in the place where she kept the things she didn't perform for anyone, the specific cold weight of a number confirmed. Because she had always known. She had suspected it from the first month after he'd left, when she'd been trying to understand how the joint account that should have had $43,000 in it had contained $1,200 and change when she'd gone to access it. She had never been able to prove it because Vincent had moved money through structures she hadn't known existed, and she'd had neither the resources nor the leverage to dig into it. $70,000. While she was working nights scrubbing bathroom tiles with a newborn behind a supply cart. "Why are you telling me this?" Charlotte said. Her voice was level. It cost her more than anything else she'd done today. Gianna looked at her hands, then back up. "Because I'm leaving him," she said, "and I needed to tell someone who deserved to know it first." The silence that followed had a different quality than the earlier ones. Not hostile, not strategic, just the quiet of two women sitting with the weight of one man's choices between them. And before Charlotte could respond, before she could determine what response was even appropriate to this specific and unexpected terrain, her phone buzzed on the desk, and she turned it over and saw the notification that changed everything. A video. 38 seconds. Posted 40 minutes ago and already carrying numbers that made her stomach tighten. From the angle and framing, she could see it had been filmed from a table in a restaurant, probably during the Marco incident. But it hadn't caught Marco. It had caught something else. It had caught the moment, this morning, in the spa reception, when Charlotte had walked in and said, "I'm Charlotte Hayes, I own this property," and the camera had swung, instinctive, catching what was interesting to Vincent Moretti's face. And Vincent's face, in that moment, was not the face of a feared organized crime boss. It was the face of a man who had just seen a ghost and understood in the same instant that the ghost had moved on and he had not. The caption read, "This man ran from her. She built an empire." And then he walked right into it. It had been shared 42,000 times. Charlotte set the phone down. Gianna was watching her. "Is that—" "Yes," Charlotte said. Gianna closed her eyes briefly, opened them. "He's going to see it." "He's probably already seen it," Charlotte said. And as if the building itself was confirming this, Charlotte's desk phone rang. The internal line, Derek's extension. And she picked it up, and Derek's voice came through tight and controlled the way it only got when something had gone sideways at a speed that required immediate judgment. "Ms. Hayes, Mr. Moretti just came back in through the main entrance. He's asking for you at the front desk. He's—" A pause that contained several things. "He has his phone in his hand and he looks like he's seen the video. And Ms. Hayes, his mother is already at the desk and she's saying things I really can't—" "I'm coming," Charlotte said. She stood up. She looked at Gianna one more time. "You should probably go back upstairs," Charlotte said. Not unkindly. Gianna shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think I—" "No," Gianna said quietly. "I don't think I should." Charlotte looked at her for one more second. Then she walked out. The lobby was not loud. That was the first thing she registered, that the confrontation she'd been braced for had not broken into the open air of the public space the way these things sometimes did, with furniture and voices and the kind of spectacle that required management at volume. Instead, it was contained, the way certain kinds of violence are contained, in the specific pressure of bodies held very still, and the lowered registers of people who understand that an audience is watching and have not yet decided whether that matters to them. Vincent was at the front desk. He had his phone in his hand, screen facing out, and on the screen Charlotte could see, even from across the lobby, even at this distance, the frozen frame of the video. His face. That moment in the spa. 42,000 shares and climbing. Connie was beside him, not touching him, but close in the way that Connie was always close when she had decided that a situation required her direct management. A proximity that communicated ownership rather than support. Derek was behind the desk, looking at Charlotte with the expression of a man who has been holding a structural load and has just seen the crane arrive. The cousins were not present. Gianna was somewhere behind Charlotte, moving or not moving. She didn't look back to check. She crossed the lobby at her normal pace. She stopped at a distance that was neither intimate nor retreating. The distance of a professional conversation between two people who have agreed, without saying so, to remain civil until they can't. Vincent looked at her. The phone was still in his hand. "Take that down," he said. "I didn't post it," Charlotte said. "You can have it removed." "I don't have grounds to have it removed. I'm in my own hotel. I said my name and my title. No law was broken." His jaw was tight. His eyes were doing that thing, the temperature regulation, the controlled heat. But there was something else in them today that hadn't been there this morning, something she identified after a moment as the specific anger of a man who has been made publicly small and is trying to determine who is responsible so he can point it somewhere useful. 46,000 shares, Connie said. Her voice was low, directed at Charlotte. "In 2 hours. Do you understand what that does to—" "Mama." Vincent's voice, still quiet, still that particular quiet that Charlotte remembered meant he was closer to the edge than the volume suggested. Connie stopped. Charlotte looked at Vincent. "I'm sorry the video exists," she said. I'm not sorry for anything it shows. You planned this, he said. The same words his mother had used that morning, but differently weighted. Less accusatory, more like a man trying to understand a map he's reading for the first time. You knew we were coming. I knew after you booked. And you stayed. It's my hotel. You could have... What? Charlotte said. Hidden? Transferred to another property? Made myself absent so you could spend a long weekend in a building with my name on it without the inconvenience of running into me? She kept her voice level but let a single degree of temperature into it. Just one. Enough so he could feel it. No. Vincent looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at the phone in his hand and turned it face down against his thigh, a gesture that struck Charlotte as oddly private, like a man putting away something he didn't want anyone else to see him looking at. I need to talk to you, he said. Not here. I've already explained, not about her. His voice shifted. Something moved in it that Charlotte couldn't immediately classify. About the video. About what comes next. He glanced at Derek, at the desk, at the two guests who had slowed near the coffee bar and were trying not to visibly watch. Privately, Charlotte studied him. The things she'd learned in 12 years of running a business that regularly required her to read people under pressure, investors, contractors, difficult guests, employees who were about to do something she needed to prevent, was that the body communicated before the voice did, and consistently more honestly. Vincent's body right now was not the body of a man preparing a threat. It was the body of a man preparing a disclosure. The difference was in the shoulders. Threat carried its weight forward. What she was seeing was weight settling downward, the posture of someone preparing to put something heavy on a table. 5 minutes, she said. My office. She turned and walked, and this time she didn't check whether he followed because she already knew he would. He closed the office door himself. He didn't sit. She didn't offer. They stood on opposite sides of the desk in the small room, and the city light came through the single window and lay flat across the surface between them. Vincent put his phone on the desk, face up this time. The video was still on screen. You need to understand what that video does, he said. Not to me. To the people around me. Charlotte said nothing. There are people in my organization, he said carefully, the carefulness of a man choosing each word the way you'd choose footing on uncertain ground, who have been watching for years for a reason to question my judgment, my ability to maintain control of a situation. He stopped. A video of me looking at you like that, in public, with a caption that puts your name and my name in the same sentence and tells 30 or 40 or 60,000 people a story about what I walked away from. He stopped again. That is a problem that has nothing to do with embarrassment. Charlotte looked at him. Are you telling me you're in danger? I'm telling you the situation is more complicated than you might. Vincent. She said his name the same flat way she had that morning. Are you or someone connected to you in danger because of that video? He met her eyes. For the first time since he'd walked into her spa reception that morning, he wasn't performing anything. No control, no authority, no assessment. Just a man standing in a small room telling the truth. Yes, he said. Charlotte sat down, not in defeat. In the deliberate way she sat down when she needed to think clearly and her body was using resources she needed elsewhere. She folded her hands on the desk. Tell me the specific concern, she said. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat, which surprised her. She watched him settle into it with the fatigue of a man who had been carrying something for a long time and had found, unexpectedly, a surface to set it down on. There's a captain in my organization, he said. Name doesn't matter. He's been building a case for 2 years that I'm not, that I'm compromised. That personal history makes me a liability. He looked at the desk between them. He's been waiting for something he could point to, something visible, something that shows the people above him and beside him that I have a weak point. He looked up. That video is the first thing he's ever had. Charlotte absorbed this. Then she said, what does he do with it? Pushes for a leadership review. Brings it to the other captains. Uses it to argue that I made bad decisions, that I had a child outside the sanctioned structure of the organization, that I walked away from it, that the woman I walked away from built something that now publicly overshadows anything I've built, and that I stood in her lobby looking like a man who... He stopped. His jaw moved. Like a man who knew it. Charlotte looked at him for a long time. "And what do you want from me?" she said. "I want you to issue a statement." The room compressed. She felt it. "A statement," she said. "Brief. Something that reframes the video, that makes it, no." The word came out clean and without hesitation and landed in the space between them like something dropped from height. Vincent stopped. "No," Charlotte said again, more quietly but no softer. "I won't reframe it. I won't issue a statement that protects you from the consequences of standing in my lobby, looking at me with the face you had. I won't do that." "Charlotte, I spent 7 years not asking you for anything," she said. The temperature she was letting into her voice now was several degrees more than one. Controlled still, but perceptible. 7 years. I didn't call you. I didn't file anything. I didn't go to the press with the story of what you left me with, or what the account had in it when I went to access it. She watched his face change at that, the flicker of something that might have been shame, moving fast and then gone. "I built my business and I raised your daughter, and I did not once point a finger at you. And the first thing you come to me with after 7 years is asking me to help protect your position in a criminal organization." She stopped herself, breathed once. "No." Vincent was very still. "The 70,000, Charlotte said. He closed his eyes. "Gianna told me." Charlotte watched him sit with that, watched him understand that the terrain had already shifted before this conversation started, in ways he hadn't mapped. "I'd like you to explain it." "That's not... I'm asking you to explain it." The silence lasted for several seconds. Then Vincent opened his eyes and looked at her with an expression that had no calculation in it, just the stripped-down look of a man who has run out of the version of the story that protected him. "I moved the money before I left," he said. My father was pressuring me. The family was pressuring me. The expectation was that He stopped. There was never going to be a version of my life that included a wife who wasn't connected, a child who wasn't inside the structure. I knew that. I'd known it for 2 years. I kept not doing it. His hands flat on his thighs. "When I finally did it, when I made the decision, I moved the money because I told myself I was protecting you. That if you were connected to me financially, you'd be..." He stopped again. "Vulnerable," Charlotte finished. "Yes?" "You moved $70,000 out of an account that I had legal claim to," Charlotte said, "and you left me with $1,200 and a newborn, and you told yourself that was protection." He said nothing. "That's what you're asking me to protect now," Charlotte said. "The reputation of the man who did that." The silence that followed this was of a different kind than any of the previous ones. It was the silence of something being set down permanently, not walked away from, but placed, with full deliberate weight, on a surface where it could be seen clearly. And then Charlotte's desk phone rang. She looked at it. Derek's extension, again. She picked it up. "Derek?" "Ms. Hayes!" Derek's voice was doing the thing, controlled, clipped, the verbal equivalent of a man walking carefully over ice. "There are 2 men in the lobby asking for Mr. Moretti. They don't have a room booking. They came in through the main entrance. They're not guests." Charlotte's eyes moved to Vincent. She watched him hear it in her face before she said anything, watched him read the shift in her expression with the speed of a man whose survival had always depended on reading rooms quickly. He was on his feet before she spoke. "Tell them he's not available," Charlotte said to Derek. "Tell them..." "I already tried, Ms. Hayes." One of them said, a pause. In the background she could hear the lobby, the ordinary sounds of it disrupted by a new frequency. "He said to tell Mr. Moretti that Sal sends his regards and that the conversation can happen here or somewhere quieter." Vincent's face had gone very still. The specific stillness of a man who has just heard a sentence that means something in a language Charlotte didn't fully speak. "Who's Sal?" Charlotte said. She was looking at Vincent. Vincent moved to the door, his hand on the handle. "Vincent?" Charlotte said. Her voice was sharp now, genuinely sharp. The edge that she almost never let surface, because it came from somewhere old and she didn't enjoy what it cost her. "Who is Sal?" He looked at her over his shoulder, and in his face was the answer to the question she hadn't known to ask until this morning. The answer to why the booking had been made under a shell company, why Gianna had been in the room all morning without leaving, why Connie had arrived with the particular tension of a woman who wasn't vacationing but relocating, even temporarily, even partially. They weren't in Chicago for a family trip. They were here because somewhere in Newark or New York or wherever the actual geography of his world currently sat, something had already gone wrong. Something that had pushed them into a luxury hotel under a false company name in a city none of them had obvious reason to be in. They were running. Not from the law, from Sal, from whatever Sal represented inside the structure that Vincent ran, or thought he ran, or was currently losing control of. Charlotte stood behind her desk and felt the shape of the next 24 hours arrange itself around her in a way she had not planned for and did not want and could not simply refuse, because the men in her lobby were in her lobby, and her guests were on 12 floors above them, and Ellie was on the 11th floor in a room surrounded by extra pillows and a one-eyed stuffed rabbit, and this building had her name on it, and every person in it was her responsibility, whether she had chosen this particular situation or not. "Get out of my office," she said to Vincent. "Go to the presidential suite and stay there. Don't use the main elevator." He stared at her. "Service elevator is at the end of the north corridor," Charlotte said. "The code is 7741. Go." "Charlotte, you can thank me or not thank me later," she said. "Right now you need to move." He moved. She picked up the desk phone. "Derek, I need Marcus from security and I need him now. And call Chicago PD non-emergency. Tell them we have 2 individuals in the lobby who are not guests and are refusing to leave. Don't make it dramatic, just make the call." She hung up. She stood alone in her office for the 4 seconds she had before she needed to walk out of it and into a lobby that now contained 2 men who worked for someone named Sal. And she used those 4 seconds to do what she'd always done when the next thing was going to be hard. She breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Once. Then she straightened her jacket and she walked out into her hotel. The 2 men were standing near the concierge station, which was specifically and deliberately where she did not want them because the concierge station was adjacent to the guest elevators, and the guest elevators went to the 11th floor. They were not large men, which was its own kind of information. Large men, in her experience, announced themselves, and people who wanted to go unnoticed tended toward the medium, the unremarkable, the face that slipped through a room without snagging on anything. These 2 were unremarkable in the specific way of men who had practiced it. One of them saw her coming. He turned. His eyes did the assessment, the same kind of assessment Vincent's did, the same catalog of threats and positions, but without Vincent's particular brand of it, without the history. Just professional and cold. Charlotte stopped at a conversational distance. Her security manager, Marcus, was already moving toward her from the far side of the lobby in her peripheral vision, and she knew without looking that Derek had made the call. "Ms. Hayes," the first man said. He knew her name. Of course he did. "You're not guests," Charlotte said. Not a question. "We're here to see a mutual friend." "This is a private property," Charlotte said. "If you'd like to be guests, I'm happy to check availability. If you're not here to check in, I need you to leave." The second man had been scanning the room. He looked back at her. "Our friend's upstairs." "I don't have information on my guest locations," Charlotte said. "That's a privacy policy, and it applies to everyone." She held the man's gaze without flinching and without performing anything, just a woman standing in her lobby who owned every inch of the floor under both their feet. "You're welcome to leave a message with the front desk." The first man looked at her for a long moment. Then, very slowly, he smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who has been given an answer he expected and has decided what that answer means about the rest of the day. "You know what's funny," he said, "is that we heard you were the kind of woman who built things." "I am," Charlotte said. "Be a shame," he said, "if this one came down." Marcus arrived at Charlotte's shoulder. 2 hotel security personnel appeared at the lobby entrance. Outside, through the revolving glass, she could see the flicker of a Chicago PD cruiser pulling to the curb. The first man saw it too. He looked at Charlotte once more, not with anger, which would have been easier to read, but with a patience that was considerably more frightening than anger, because it implied that this conversation was being paused rather than ended. Then he buttoned his jacket and walked toward the door, and the second man followed, and they passed through the revolving glass without looking back, and disappeared into the gray November street. Charlotte stood where she was until they were gone. Then she turned to Marcus. "I need camera footage from the last 40 minutes pulled and saved, and I need the lobby doors staffed through tonight." "Yes, ma'am." She turned to Derek. Get Anna Ferreira on the phone. Tell her we've moved to emergency. Derek was already dialing. Charlotte looked at the revolving door, the police cruiser outside, the gray city beyond the glass. She was standing in the lobby of the most beautiful building she'd ever made, and somewhere in the last 3 hours it had become something entirely different from a hotel, and she had not chosen that and could not undo it, and had to decide right now, in the next few minutes, before the shape of this hardened into something permanent, who she was going to be inside it. Not the woman who'd been left. Not the woman who'd built an empire to prove something to someone who wasn't watching. Not a symbol, not a statement, not the protagonist of someone else's story about comebacks and justice and the satisfying arc of a powerful man humbled. Just Charlotte Hayes, who had built something real and who was going to protect just Charlotte Hayes, who had built something real and who was going to protect it. She moved. Not fast, not with the visible urgency that would have transmitted itself through the lobby and into the awareness of every guest currently ordering coffee or crossing toward the elevators with their luggage. She moved at the pace of a woman who knew exactly where she was going and had decided to get there, which looked from the outside like calm and felt from the inside like controlled falling. Derek matched her stride toward the concierge station. Anna's on hold for you. In a minute, Charlotte scanned the lobby. 2 guests at the coffee bar, one watching his phone, one looking toward the door where the police cruiser was still visible at the curb. 3 people near the elevators. A family with a stroller crossing toward the restaurant. All of them inside a building that had just been threatened by 2 men she didn't know on behalf of someone named Sal, and not one of them knew it, and her job for the next several hours was to make sure it stayed that way. Where's Connie? Spa level. She went back down about 10 minutes ago. And the cousins? Restaurant, still there, Charlotte calculated. The cousins were a low variable. Connie was a medium one. The high ones were in the presidential suite on 14 and somewhere in the gray November city outside, in a car or on a phone or both, deciding what the next move looked like. Marcus? She turned to her security manager. I need a quiet presence on 14, not visible from the elevator, not uniformed, just someone in the corridor. Marcus nodded once. He was a former Chicago PD sergeant, 22 years, and the particular quality she'd hired him for was exactly this: the ability to hear a request like that and not ask a single unnecessary question. The officer outside, Charlotte said. Send Derek to speak with him. Non-emergency. Property management asking for a routine presence on the block through this evening. Routine. No incident report yet. And if they ask why? Guest privacy concern. Potential unwanted contact. She paused. That's accurate. She walked to the small private phone alcove off the concierge station and picked up Derek's hold line. Anna, she said. Anna Ferreira's voice came back without preamble because that was the quality Charlotte paid for. Talk to me. 2 men in my lobby, not guests. Asked for a guest by a reference name, Sal. My guest is Vincent Moretti. The implication was a threat to the property. She kept it precise. Factual. The way Anna needed it. Chicago PD is currently outside on a non-emergency call. I have camera footage being pulled. A brief silence. Did either man make an explicit verbal threat? One said. Charlotte paused, reconstructing it exactly. Be a shame if this one came down. Implicit, Anna said. Probably not enough for immediate legal action, but enough to document. I want you to write down exactly what was said, word for word, in the next 10 minutes while it's exact in your memory. Email it to me with a timestamp. Already planning to. Is Moretti aware of the contact? I warned him before it happened. He's in the suite. And his connection to these men. He told me there's an internal power struggle in his organization. A captain named, he didn't give a last name, who's been looking for a reason to challenge his leadership. My read is that the men in the lobby were either working for that captain or were a message from him. Moretti and his family may have come to Chicago specifically to create distance from a situation that was already deteriorating in Newark. Another silence, longer this time. Charlotte could hear Anna thinking, which was a specific sound, a particular quality of breathing that meant something was being assembled. Charlotte, Anna said, you understand that if you're correct about their reason for being there, And if the men who came to your lobby were sent to locate Moretti and communicate something to him, then your property has now been identified as his current location. I know. And that changes your exposure. I know. You need to consider asking them to leave. Charlotte stood in the alcove with the phone in her hand and looked out at the lobby. Rosa from the spa was crossing toward the elevator. Two of the kitchen runners were moving lunch service carts through the side corridor. A couple was checking out at the front desk, laughing about something. The woman adjusting the strap of a bag, the man pocketing his keycard, both of them entirely ordinary, entirely unaware, entirely her responsibility. I'll consider it, Charlotte said. I need 2 hours. Why 2 hours? Because if I ask them to leave right now, in the middle of all of this, it will confirm everything the video already suggested, that I have no control over this situation. She stopped, refocused. And because Gianna Moretti came to my office an hour ago and told me something that I need to understand better before I make any moves. What did she tell you? That Vincent moved $70,000 out of a joint account 3 days before he left me. That she found papers 6 months ago and has been sitting on it. Charlotte paused. And that she's leaving him. The silence from Anna's end had a different texture now. Not the assembly sound, something quieter. Are you okay? Anna said. I'm working, Charlotte said. I'll call you in 2 hours. She hung up. She wrote out the exact words. Be a shame if this one came down. In an email to Anna with a timestamp, sent it, and put her phone in her jacket pocket and walked back out into her hotel. The afternoon moved. 4 o'clock became 4:30, 4:30 became 5, and the light outside the lobby windows shifted from the flat gray of November afternoon to the particular dark-edged amber of early urban evening, the city beginning its transition between its daytime and nighttime versions of itself. Charlotte worked. She reviewed the security footage with Marcus, identified the two men by face, if not name, noted the specific efficiency of their scan of the lobby, their positioning relative to the elevators, the moment one of them had registered the police cruiser and made the decision to leave. She documented everything. She forwarded it to Anna. At 5:40, Derek came to find her in the corridor outside the business center. Mr. Moretti is asking to see you again, he said. His voice had the quality of a man delivering a piece of news he was not sure how to categorize. Where? He came down to the lobby. He's at the bar, alone. Charlotte straightened the cuff of her jacket. Keep Marcus in the room. The bar off the Meridian Grand's lobby was a space Charlotte had designed for the specific purpose of comfort. Low lighting, natural wood, the kind of seating that made long conversations feel possible without making short ones feel insufficient. It was half filled at this hour with the early evening crowd, business travelers unwinding, a group of women celebrating something with Prosecco, a man alone at the far end with a glass of something amber in front of him that he hadn't touched. Vincent. He looked different than he had in her office. The overcoat was gone. He was in the same clothes he'd had on at check-in, but they carried the hours now. Slightly worn at the edges, the collar of his shirt open, the sleeves pushed back to the forearm the way she remembered him pushing them when he was working through something, and needed the physical release of the gesture. He looked less like the version of himself she'd been bracing for, and more like the version she'd actually known, which was more dangerous in a different way. She sat across from him without asking if she was welcome. He looked up. Did they come back? He said. No. They will. Probably, Charlotte said. Tell me about Sal. He looked at his glass. Salvatore Ferrante. He runs the Northern Jersey operation. He's been my second in command for 4 years. He's been building a move against me for 2 of them. And you knew. I knew something was building. I didn't know the timeline had moved up until 3 days ago. His jaw shifted. Someone in my inner circle told him I was in Chicago before I'd told anyone outside the family. Who? Vincent was quiet for a moment, then, Marco. Charlotte absorbed this. The cousin. The man who had been loud in the restaurant this afternoon while someone filmed it. The man Connie had brought along as an extra presence, presumably for support, who had apparently been reporting their location to the person trying to remove Vincent from power. Does Connie know? Charlotte said. No. He paused. Not yet. Are you going to tell her? He picked up the glass, put it down without drinking. I've been trying to figure out if she sent him. The sentence sat between them. Charlotte looked at him steadily. You think your mother might have authorized the information? I think my mother has spent 30 years making decisions for the good of the organization, Vincent said. And I think she has decided that I am no longer, that I have become... He stopped. His hand on the glass was not quite steady. She saw it. He saw her see it. He moved the hand to his knee. She had a conversation with Ferrante 6 weeks ago. I found out about it 2 weeks ago. I don't know what was said. Charlotte sat with this for a moment. Vincent, she said, I need you to understand your situation very clearly. She waited for him to look at her. Those men came into my hotel. They threatened my property. Whether or not that was directed at you or intended as a message or whatever it means in the context of your organizational politics, it happened in my building, and it is now my problem as well as yours. She kept her voice at the temperature of someone stating engineering facts, not grievances. So I need you to tell me, is there a physical risk to my guest tonight? He met her eyes. She'd asked him the right question, the one that required a real answer rather than a managed one. And she'd asked it in the right tone, the one that made clear she wasn't asking for her own protection, but for the people on the 12 floors above them who had no idea what they'd checked into. If Ferrante's moving tonight, Vincent said slowly, he's moving against me, not the hotel. He wants leverage. He doesn't want... A pause, choosing the word. Collateral. Is that a yes or a no? It's a probably not, Vincent said. But probably not isn't no. No, Charlotte agreed. It isn't. She stood up. He looked up at her. I'm going to ask you to do something, she said, and I need you to do it without negotiating. He waited. Call Ferrante, she said. Tonight. Not to capitulate, not to threaten, to set a meeting. Somewhere in this city, somewhere you choose, somewhere that isn't this building. She looked at him steadily. I need him to know that you are not in this hotel, that this address is not the relevant geography anymore. Whatever happens between you and him needs to happen somewhere else. Vincent stared at her. You want me to walk out of your hotel and into a meeting with the man who's trying to have me removed? I want you to move the problem out of my building, Charlotte said. What you do with it after that is your concern. That's... He stopped. Dangerous, Charlotte said. I know. Your entire life is dangerous. This is a specific danger I'm asking you to manage in a specific direction. She paused. I'm also going to ask you to get Gianna and your mother and the cousins, including Marco, yes, into a car and to a different property by midnight. I'll have Derek make arrangements at the Marriott on Wacker. It'll be handled quietly. Vincent was very still. You're throwing us out, he said. I'm protecting my guests, Charlotte said, including you, until midnight, at which point you'll no longer be my guests. Something moved across his face. Not anger, not quite. You're remarkable, he said. The word came out without performance, which made it hit harder than it might have otherwise. Charlotte did not react. She was very practiced at not reacting to things that came at her in vulnerable moments, which was a skill she had built from necessity and was not proud of in the way some people were proud of their defenses. Midnight, she said, and she walked away from the bar. The next 4 hours were the most controlled chaos Charlotte had managed since the first year of the Cincinnati property, when the roof had partially collapsed during a January ice storm, and she'd had to relocate 43 guests to 3 different properties in a single night while simultaneously managing the insurance claim and the contractor and a burst pipe in the basement, all of it with Ellie in a playpen in the corner of the lobby because she'd had nobody to leave her with. That night had built something in her, a kind of operational nerve that didn't break under compounding pressure, because it had learned that compounding pressure was just pressure experienced sequentially, and you handled each piece of it in the moment it arrived rather than trying to carry all of them at once. She applied that now. Marcus reported at 7 that the 2 men had been spotted in a vehicle parked on the block. Not moving, not approaching, just present. Charlotte noted this, passed it to the CPD contact Derek had established, and made sure her lobby doors had visible staff through the evening. At 8:15, the video hit national circulation, not the local Chicago social shares, the actual national news cycle, with Charlotte's name attached and the Hayes collection mentioned in 3 separate feature pieces that ran simultaneously in the kind of digital-first outlets that moved fast on a story with a clean narrative shape. The abandoned woman, the empire, the Mafia Boss walking into her lobby. The comments were overwhelming and almost uniformly in one direction. Derek brought her the numbers at 8:40. She was in her office. She looked at them. Bookings for all 12 Hayes Collection properties had spiked, a 40% increase in the last 2 hours on the Chicago flagship alone. She set the report down. She thought about Ellie upstairs, asleep by now probably, the extra pillows, the one-eyed rabbit. She thought about the Cincinnati property and the ice storm and the playpen in the lobby. She thought about the note she'd burned over the kitchen sink and the way the fire had moved along the paper from the bottom and turned it all to nothing in less than 30 seconds. She picked up her phone and called a number she'd had for 2 years and never used. It rang 3 times. Then a man's voice, rough-edged, not what she'd expected. "Ms. Hayes," the voice said. She didn't ask how he knew her name. People in certain positions always knew. "I need a conversation," she said. "Not tonight, tomorrow morning." About a situation in my hotel that has your name attached to it," she said. "Specifically, the 2 men you sent to my lobby this afternoon." A pause. "I don't know what you're referring to." "Then this will be a short conversation," Charlotte said. "I'll be at my hotel. 8 a.m. You're welcome to send someone who does know what I'm referring to." She hung up. Her hand was steady. She checked. It was. At 9:50, Vincent knocked on her office door. She said, "Come in," and he came in and closed it and stood there, and she could see immediately that something had changed in the last 3 hours. The deliberate stillness was gone, replaced by something more raw, the look of a man who has had a conversation that broke something he'd been maintaining for years. "I talked to Ferrante," he said. "And?" "He didn't threaten me directly. He was—" A pause. "Reasonable, which is worse." Charlotte said nothing, let him continue. "He knows about the video. He knows I'm here, he said." Vincent's voice shifted. "He said the organization's confidence in my judgment had become a question that required an answer, and that the answer needed to happen in person, in Newark, within 48 hours. Are you going?" Vincent looked at her, the full weight of it. "If I go, it's either a conversation or it's not. 50-50. And if you don't go?" Then he reads it as confirmation, and it becomes a certainty. Charlotte looked at him. A man she had loved imperfectly and a long time ago, standing in her office at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night in November, calculating the odds of surviving a meeting with the person trying to take everything from him. "Vincent," she said, "earlier you asked me to issue a statement." He waited. "I'm not going to do that," she said, "but tomorrow morning I have a conversation scheduled that might change the shape of your situation. I can't promise what it produces. I can tell you that it's the only move I'm willing to make in your direction." She held his gaze. "The rest of it is yours." He looked at her for a long moment. "Why?" he said. She thought about it. She gave him the honest answer because she was tired, and because the honest answer was simple. "Because my daughter's father being killed in Newark solves nothing," she said. "And because I am not a person who lets things happen to people in her building when she has a move available." She paused. "That's the extent of it. Don't construct a larger meaning." He nodded once, the single nod of a man receiving terms. "The car for the Marriott is ready at midnight," Charlotte said. "Be in the lobby at 11:50. He turned to go. "Vincent," he stopped. "Tell Marco," she said, "that the next time he uses my restaurant as cover for a phone call, he doesn't want overheard. He should know that every table in that room has a camera on it." She paused. "I reviewed the footage this afternoon. He was on the phone twice during lunch, same number both times. I have a record of it." The silence. She watched Vincent understand what she'd just told him, that she had documentation of Marco's contact with Ferrante, that she'd been holding it for 4 hours, that she'd chosen when and how to deploy it. "You could have told me that this afternoon," he said. "I know," Charlotte said. He left. She sat alone in her office and listened to her hotel breathe around her. The soft infrastructure of it, the ventilation and the distant percussion of the kitchen finishing service and the elevator moving between floors. And she thought about tomorrow morning, about the conversation at 8 a.m., about what she was going to say to whoever walked through her door representing Salvatore Ferrante, and whether the argument she'd constructed over the last 4 hours would hold, and whether it mattered that it was an argument built not on power, but on the one thing she'd always had more of than anyone who'd ever underestimated her. Information. She had the video. She had the footage of Marco. She had Gianna's testimony about the money. She had the timeline, the booking records, the lobby camera, the documented threat. She had 42,000 shares and climbing. She had Anna Ferreira on standby and a CPD presence on the block and 4,000 employees whose jobs were attached to a reputation that was, at this particular moment, stronger than it had ever been. She picked up her pen and wrote out everything she intended to say at 8 a.m. in the precise ordered way she'd learned to prepare for negotiations where the other side had more apparent power and she had to make the structure of the argument do the work that muscle couldn't. She wrote for 40 minutes, then she read it back. Then she crossed out half of it, because the half she crossed out was the half that explained too much, and she'd learned a long time ago that in a room where you hold the better information, you speak less. She went upstairs at 11:30. She checked on Ellie, still asleep. One arm over the rabbit, the extra pillows arranged into a specific fortification around her small body that she'd clearly assembled herself before sleeping. The particular architecture of a child who had learned to make a safe perimeter out of whatever soft things were available. Charlotte stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at her daughter in the dark room. Then she went to bed. She did not sleep well. She hadn't expected to. At 7:49 in the morning, 11 minutes before the meeting she'd scheduled with a representative of a man she'd never met, Charlotte Hayes stood at the lobby entrance of the Meridian Grand in the gray Chicago morning and watched a black car pull to the curb. One person got out. Not a large man. Not one of the two from yesterday. A woman, mid-50s, dark coat, the kind of face that had been handsome for a long time and had settled into something more useful than handsome, sharp, watchful, economical with its expressions. She walked toward the entrance with the unhurried pace of a person who has attended enough meetings in enough buildings to have stopped being impressed by any of them. Charlotte held the door. The woman looked at her. A single beat of assessment. "Ms. Hayes," she said. "Thank you for coming," Charlotte said. She led her to the office. The woman's name, she learned in the first 30 seconds, was Diane. No last name offered, none requested. She sat across from Charlotte's desk with her coat still on and her hands folded in her lap, and she looked at Charlotte with the particular attention of someone who has been briefed and is now comparing the briefing against the reality. "Mr. Ferrante sends his regards," Diane said. "Mr. Ferrante sent 2 men to my lobby yesterday who implied a threat to my property," Charlotte said. "I'd prefer he send apologies, but regards will do for now." Diane's expression didn't change, which meant she'd been told to absorb the opening without reacting to it. Charlotte noted this, prepared accordingly. "I want to be clear about what this conversation is," Charlotte said. "I'm not here to negotiate on Mr. Moretti's behalf. I'm not his representative and I'm not his ally, and whatever happens between the two of them in the next 48 hours is outside the scope of what I'm prepared to involve myself in." She paused. "What I am here to address is the specific decision to use my property as a location for whatever communication Mr. Ferrante wanted to send." Diane waited. "My hotel has been in the national news cycle for approximately 14 hours, Charlotte said. She turned her laptop screen to face Diane. The numbers were there. The coverage, the shares, the booking spike, the 3 feature pieces, the social circulation that by morning had moved past 600,000 engagements. Every major news outlet with a crime and culture desk has now connected the Hayes collection with the name Moretti. That connection was not my creation, but it is currently my problem." Diane looked at the screen, looked back at Charlotte. "And what it means," Charlotte continued, "is that anything that happens at or adjacent to this property in the next week will occur under a level of public scrutiny that makes it deeply unattractive as a location for any further communication of any kind." She kept her voice factual, the way she kept it in every negotiation where the other side needed to understand consequences rather than feel threatened. "I'm not in a position to guarantee what my security staff observes and reports. I'm not in a position to guarantee what my cameras capture. And I am very much not in a position to guarantee what my legal team does with the documentation we've already accumulated from yesterday's visit." Silence. "So I'm asking," Charlotte said, "as a professional courtesy between 2 people who both understand what it means to run an operation that depends on discretion, take it somewhere else. Whatever it is. Take it somewhere that isn't carrying my name in the headline. Diane looked at her for a long moment. The expression on her face had moved fractionally from its original neutrality into something Charlotte classified, with considerable experience reading rooms, as the look of a person who came in expecting one conversation and has received a more competent one. Mr. Ferrante will want something in return, Diane said. Mr. Ferrante is welcome to want things, Charlotte said. He can want the documentation we have to remain internal. He can want the footage of the two men from yesterday to stay off of Anna Ferrer's desk, which is where it's currently sitting. Those are things that become possible if this property stops being relevant to his situation with Mr. Moretti. She paused. What is not available is anything that requires my active participation, my silence on a matter of law, or my cooperation with anything that crosses into territory my legal team has advised me to avoid. That's a narrow window, Diane said. It is, Charlotte agreed. I found that narrow windows are the only ones worth offering. Diane was quiet for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes. A calculation, long and careful. Then she unfolded her hands and placed them flat on her knees, which Charlotte read as the body language of a person who has made a decision. I'll convey your position, Diane said. I'd appreciate that. The two men from yesterday won't return to this property. Good. Diane stood. She buttoned her coat. She looked at Charlotte one more time with that same economic assessment, the look of a person revising an estimate. You're an interesting woman, Ms. Hayes, she said. Not warmth, just accuracy. I run a hotel, Charlotte said. She showed Diane out through the lobby, watched the black car pull away from the curb, and stood on the pavement for a moment in the cold November air. The city moved around her in its morning way. Delivery trucks, early pedestrians, a runner crossing at the light with her breath making small clouds in the air. Charlotte went back inside. At 9:15, Connie Moretti appeared at the entrance to Charlotte's office. Charlotte looked up from her desk. Connie stood in the doorway without Connie's usual territorial posture, the shoulder-width stance, the elevated chin. She was wearing less than she'd worn for any of the previous encounters, a simple wool dress and no jewelry except her watch. And she looked in the unguarded way of a woman who had just spent a night processing something difficult, her age. Charlotte gestured to the chair. Connie sat. She looked at the desk between them. Then she looked at the photograph of Ellie, which she hadn't looked at directly in any of the previous conversations, and she looked at it for a long time. She looks like him, Connie said. She has his eyes, Charlotte said. The rest is mine. Connie was quiet. The quiet lasted long enough that Charlotte let it. Marco is my husband's son, Connie said finally. Not mine. I raised him from 11, after the second marriage. She stopped. I didn't know what he'd done. I need you to know that. I believe you, Charlotte said. She said it because she did, not because it cost her nothing. It cost her something, but it was true. Connie looked at her. The look was not Connie's usual instrument, not the management look, not the assessment, not the social pressure. It was the look of a woman who is sitting across from someone she wronged a long time ago and has run out of the narratives that made the wrongdoing comfortable to carry. I was not kind to you, Connie said. Charlotte said nothing. I was not kind to you, Connie said again, as if saying it twice made it more honest. And I was not right. About what you were. About what you would... She stopped. I told him you weren't strong enough for his life. That you would break under it. She paused. I was wrong about which one of you broke. The room was very quiet. Charlotte looked at this woman who had called her the maid at dinner tables and watched her carry luggage and believed she was seeing the full picture of a person when she was seeing only the surface, and she held the complicated specific weight of being told by that same woman 20 years later that the assessment had been incorrect. Yes, Charlotte said. You were. Connie nodded, a single small nod. Not quite an apology. Connie was not built for apologies, Charlotte understood, in the same way that some structures are not built to flex. But it was as close as the woman was capable of coming, and Charlotte accepted it for what it was. Is he going back to Newark? Charlotte said. Yes, Connie said. This morning. Will he be all right? Connie looked at her. The first fully honest look, unmanaged, unfiled. I don't know, she said. Charlotte nodded. He wants to see the girl before he leaves, Connie said. I told him I would ask you. I told him, a pause. I told him the answer was yours to give and that he had no claim on it, and he agreed. Charlotte sat with this. She thought about Ellie asleep in the room with the extra pillows, about the honest conversation she'd had over 3 years about a father who had made a choice and choices and the life that lives inside them, about what it meant for a 7-year-old to meet a man who was a stranger and a father simultaneously in a hotel lobby on a Tuesday morning with no preparation and no context. She thought about what it meant to make that decision for someone who couldn't make it for herself yet. Not today, Charlotte said. Not like this. She looked at Connie steadily. But if he wants to be known to her, there are ways to do that that don't involve ambush. I'll think about what that looks like, and I'll contact him when I've thought about it. Connie absorbed this. She nodded once more. Then she stood and straightened her dress and looked at Charlotte one last time. For what it's worth, Connie said, this hotel is the finest I've stayed in. Charlotte looked at her. Thank you. I mean the service, Connie said. The people who work here, they treat you like you matter. A pause. That comes from the top. She walked out. Charlotte sat alone in the office for a long time. At 10:30, she took the elevator to the 11th floor. Ellie was awake, cross-legged on the bed in her pajamas, watching something on the tablet with the headphones Charlotte had packed for exactly this kind of morning. She looked up when Charlotte came in and pulled one headphone off and said, Mom, did you know this hotel has a pool? I know, Charlotte said. I put it there. Ellie considered this with the specific look she used when her mother said something that should have been surprising but somehow wasn't. Can we go? After breakfast, Charlotte said. She sat on the edge of the bed. Ellie leaned into her the way she did. Automatic, gravitational, the way children lean before they learn to calculate the lean. Charlotte put her arm around her and held her, feeling the small, solid warmth of her, the particular weight of this specific human being who was the best evidence Charlotte had that she'd spent her life doing something real. Mom? Ellie said, muffled slightly against Charlotte's side. Is something happening? Charlotte looked down at the top of her daughter's head, the dark hair, slightly tangled from sleep. The question delivered with the matter-of-fact quality Ellie used for things she'd already half understood and was only asking to confirm. Something happened, Charlotte said. It's done now. Ellie was quiet for a moment, then, Good. Charlotte held her daughter and looked out the window at the lake, which was visible from this floor, flat and gray and enormous, doing nothing except being what it was. She thought about Anna Ferreira, who called at 11:30 to confirm that the footage had been received and filed, and that Diane's assurances, while informal, were consistent with a pattern she recognized as reliable. She thought about Derek, who had reported that morning that the Marriott on Wacker had confirmed the Moretti party's checkout at 9 a.m., no incidents. She thought about Marcus and the camera footage and the CPD contact and every piece of the structure she'd built in the last 24 hours to keep her people safe. All of it held. Nothing had burned. She thought about the video, which by noon had crossed 1.2 million engagements and had generated enough inbound media interest that Charlotte had finally asked her publicist to draft the single-sentence response she'd specified. The Hayes collection applies the same standard to every guest, nothing more. The sentence was sufficient because the video had already told the story, and the story was accurate, and Charlotte had learned a long time ago that the only narratives worth defending were the ones you'd built with true materials. At 2 p.m, she received a text from a number she didn't have saved. The meeting is arranged for tomorrow in Newark. Ferrante agreed to terms. Whatever you said to his person this morning, it worked. I don't know how to explain what that cost you or why you did it. I'm going to spend a long time thinking about that. She read it twice. Then she typed back, Don't spend too long. You have a meeting to prepare for. A pause. Then, Thank you. She put the phone in her pocket without responding to that. She didn't have a response to it that was both honest and kind. And she'd decided years ago that when honesty and kindness couldn't coexist in a single sentence, she'd choose silence. 3 weeks later, Charlotte opened the new wing of the Charleston property on a Thursday afternoon in December, standing at the podium in a room full of employees and city officials and industry press with the particular feeling she'd had at every other opening. Not triumph, never quite triumph, more like the feeling of a door swinging fully open onto a room that had taken years to build and was finally ready to be lived in. She talked about the people in the room. She talked about the housekeeper who had been with the Hayes collection since the Cincinnati property, who was in the front row. She talked about what it meant to build something that treated the person who turned down the beds with the same dignity as the person who slept in them. She talked about the scholarship fund they were launching in conjunction with the Charleston opening, 15 full scholarships annually for hospitality workers pursuing management degrees, funded by 2% of the property's annual revenue, designed on the specific principle that the people who understood the business from the ground up were the ones best equipped to run it. The room was warm. The applause was genuine. Ellie was in the second row in the new dress she'd selected herself, gap-toothed grin at full capacity, sitting beside Charlotte's assistant and looking at her mother with the expression of a child who is watching something she will understand better in 20 years. Afterward, in the quiet of the back corridor, while the reception continued in the main hall, Charlotte stood alone for a moment against the cool wall and let herself have the 30 seconds. She counted them out. 8 years of this. 8 years of the 30 seconds. She thought about everything that had happened in November in Chicago, and what it had and hadn't resolved, and what she had and hadn't decided yet. She had spoken to Anna twice about the documentation. It remained filed and secure. Diane's assurances had held. No further contact. No further presence near the Meridian Grand. No return of the two men. Whatever had happened in Newark between Vincent and Ferrante, it had happened outside her sphere, and she had made her peace with not knowing the outcome, which was the same peace she'd made with every part of Vincent's world that she'd chosen not to look directly at. She had written an email to the contact number 3 weeks after Chicago. It had taken her 4 drafts. The final version was 11 sentences long. It outlined a proposal for Ellie, not a custody arrangement, not a legal framework, not anything that required courts or documents, a structure for contact, a letter to start. Not from Vincent to Ellie, but from Ellie's mother to Ellie, at 8 years old, explaining more fully the honest version of the story, adding the pieces that 8 could hold that 7 hadn't been able to. And then, if Ellie chose, a letter back. And then if that held, a phone call. And then if that held, something else. Slowly, on Ellie's terms, on Charlotte's terms, on no one else's. Vincent had replied in one sentence, "Whatever you decide, I'll wait." She had printed that sentence and put it in a drawer, not because she needed to keep it, but because it was the first sentence he'd ever sent her that required nothing from her in response, and that had its own kind of weight. She hadn't burned it. Gianna Moretti had filed for separation 6 days after Chicago. Charlotte knew this because it had made a quiet note in one of the organized crime coverage pieces that Anna had flagged, and because Gianna had sent a brief email to an address she'd found through the hotel's public contact, which said, "I'm sorry for the money. I know that doesn't fix it. I hope you know that you deserved better than any of us gave you." Charlotte had read it 3 times and felt, under the complexity of everything else it produced in her, the clean, factual truth of it. She had replied, "Thank you for telling me what you found. Take care of yourself." She had meant both sentences. The night of the Charleston opening, after Ellie was asleep in the hotel room, one additional pillow this time, she was growing out of the fortress phase. The rabbit finally fully retired from active duty and installed on the bookshelf in their Chicago apartment. Charlotte stood on the balcony of the presidential suite in the new wing and looked at the harbor. Charleston at night was different from Chicago at night, warmer in the light, even in December. The harbor moved differently than the lake. It had tides, it breathed in and out, it was connected to something larger and more complex than itself. She'd always found that more honest than a body of water with no exit. She thought about where she was and how far it was from where she'd started and resisted. The way she always resisted, the urge to make the distance mean something symbolic. It was just distance, distance covered by moving. One day after the next, one property after the next, one decision after the next, not toward a destination she'd identified at the beginning, but toward the life that had assembled itself out of every choice she'd actually made. She was not the woman who'd been left. She was not the comeback story or the symbol or the face of a particular kind of triumph that people posted about under captions they thought were empowering. She was a woman who had built something real, who had held on to it through the ice storm and the night shifts and the empty account and the years of moving every time stability felt close and pulling away because it wasn't close enough yet, who had stood in her own lobby and said her own name to the man who had walked away from it and had not shaken and had not reached for his approval and had not needed his recognition to know what she was. She was a woman with a daughter asleep in the next room who would grow up knowing that the world could be navigated on your own terms if you were willing to work harder than the world expected and refuse to apologize for what the work produced. That was enough. More than enough. More than the woman scrubbing bathroom tiles at 2 a.m. had been able to imagine as a possibility, let alone a reality. She stood on the balcony until the harbor went fully dark and the lights of the city reflected in the water, and she was cold enough that she could feel it in her hands. Then she went inside. She checked on Ellie, still asleep, the rabbit on the shelf, watching. Charlotte straightened the blanket across her daughter's shoulders with the specific economy of a gesture performed 1,000 times. The gesture that required no decision because it had become the kind of love that lived in the hands rather than the mind. She turned off the lamp. She stood in the dark room for a moment and listened to her daughter breathe, slow, steady, completely unafraid, and she let the sound of it fill the 30 seconds she always gave herself. She counted them out. Then she went to bed, and for the first time in a very long while, she slept straight through to morning.